Hello, and welcome to what I like to call World of Writecraft. It's been many months since I've done this, and so I hope to get back at it today. We're going to start off by doing some editing. I haven't looked at this story since last time I streamed my writing stream, so that's been a while. There's about 17 pages that is already written, and we'll go through them and see if there's any changes that need to be made. So I will just get into it. The process is pretty simple. I will read a paragraph, and if there's any editing need to be done, I'll explain why I'm doing the editing and my choices that have been made. And then I will just continue like that every paragraph. Chris was slowly moving up the staircase with his side up against the wall. The house was dark. Despite it being night, there was still light bleeding through the curtains from the streetlights outside. The light was amplified by the vent powers in his eyes. This gave him more than enough light to see. He was clothed in black pants with a matching shirt. He had black armored tactical vest on to help him avoid taking extra damage. There was a black Glock pistol in a holster on his side. In his hand, he was carrying a dirk with a slightly wider than average blade. It had a simple black grip and it looked sharp. Hello, Grumpy Gus. Thanks for the lurk. Looked sharp, well cleaned. In his right ear, he had a black communications device. You're taking your sweet time. You're going to be late at the pace you're going. This seems almost backwards, so I might change this to, at the pace you're going to be late. You're taking your sweet time. At the pace you're going to be late. Sounds a bit better. Chris stopped moving as he heard Graven talking to him from the communications piece. He spoke under his voice through the transmitter. I'm moving slowly because you said any noise would wake him. Now let me work. He began to move up the stairs to the next floor. Yes, but you're moving slow even for a human. Learn to walk quieter at a faster speed. Chris slightly grunted in response as he walked down the hallway. They had procured the building's plans a few days ago. Then Chris scouted out the house while the target was away. The next door was the bedroom. It was slightly open. No lights were on. He glanced in as he passed just in case someone was in there. The target was supposed to be alone in the house, but Chris wanted to be certain. He moved past the bathroom to the next door, which was closed. Chris knew the target was asleep in that room. Draven had eyes on him from the outside. Chris moved past the door and checked the next two rooms. One was an office. It had a few bookcases, a desk, and a computer. The other was an empty bedroom. It had a dresser and a bed, but no decor. Chris moved back to the occupied bedroom's door. He gripped the doorknob with his left hand and gently turned it, pushing open the door. He was happy that there was no squeak as it slowly opened. When there was just enough space to squeeze through, Chris went into the bedroom. He surveyed the room before moving further in. There was a dresser, but unlike the other bedroom, this one had decor. A few pictures were hung up on the wall and were sitting on the dresser. There were also dirty clothes littered around the room and a laundry basket full of clothes in the corner. The target was sleeping in the bed. His blankets were thrown off to one side, but he still had the sheet on top of him. He was also wearing a gray nightshirt. Chris moved silently over to the bed and looked down at the target. He was sleeping so peacefully. Chris raised the dirk, preparing to pierce the target's heart. He quickly brought the blade down, but was stopped as the man's eyes opened wide and he caught Chris's arm that was holding the dirk right before it went into his chest. I don't think I need to say that it was holding the dirk. and don't need to capitalize the H there. Chris brought his left hand to bear and tried to punch the man in the head, but his arm was caught by the target. They locked eyes. The man in the bed smiled as he was looking up. He took a quick whiff of the air. Ah, vampire, huh? I was wondering when they would send someone. Chris struggled to get his hands free. He knew the target was going to be strong, but he didn't expect him to be this strong. He'd only encountered vampires with a strength like this. He wasn't used to having his strength matched by non-vampires. He grunted as he used all his strength to pull his arms free, but to no avail. I don't think so, little vampire. It won't be that easy. He pulled Chris closer and then shoved him back, sending him flying against the wall. He jumped out of bed and stood on the floor, readying for Chris's next move. Chris hit the wall with a thud, and the dagger went flying out of his hands. He stood up and collected his thoughts as he saw his target jump out of bed. He rushed over to him and punched him in the stomach, following up with a shot to the head. The target grunted as Chris's fist went into his stomach. He bent slightly as the impact left him without air, but he managed to lean back and move his head. The fist glanced off the side of his face. In response, he grabbed Chris and flung him against the far wall. He hit a picture, breaking glass and sending it falling to the floor. The target growled, "Have it your way." Then all at once, the hair on his skin began to grow and became thicker like fur. It seemed like his very bones grew as he became taller, and his muscles became enlarged, filling out his frame. The shirt ripped and hung in tatters, and his boxes were stretched to their limits, their seams at the breaking point. His arms were like furry barrels, and the nails on his hands grew and hardened, becoming claws. His face morphed, his nose and mouth stretching and becoming bear-like, with razor-sharp teeth. Chris looked on in awe. He had heard about were-creatures before, but he'd never seen one transform. He knew it might happen on this mission, but he had hoped to end it before the fight even started. For the first time in many years, he felt a tinge of fear. He went for his gun. He pulled it out of his holster and pointed it at the werebear, but before he could pull the trigger, he heard driven over the comlink. "No guns. Keep it quiet. If you can't handle it, I'll do it." Chris put his gun away as he stood up, saying, "No, I can do this," and looked for the dagger. It was lying near the feet of the werebear. It was the only other way to kill him for good. It was a silver dagger, after all. He needed to get that dagger and pierce the heart of the target as quickly as he could. Chris moved at a blinding speed, charging shoulder first into the werebear. This time, the werebear was sent flying into the wall. The wall dented, cracking on impact, but he landed on his feet. He moved back towards Chris, who had just picked up the silver dirt. The werebear swiped, but Chris moved out of the way. He had his own attempt at slashing the creature, but got caught by one of the claws before he could get close enough. The claw raked across his chest, but thankfully his body armor stopped most of the damage. There was still a moment of pain. There was still a moment of pain as the claws scraped against the flesh. He looked down and saw that the claws had gone right through the metal. He was thankful he had some armor on, or his guts may very well have spilled onto the floor. Chris tried again, but this time the target caught his hand. Claws dug into his wrist. His grip diminished as the claws went deeper, cutting his tendons. Chris did everything he could to stop himself from making any noise as he endured the pain. With a grunt, Chris pulled back, managing to pull himself free, but his hand was mangled. Draven spoke over the comment. "What are you doing? We talked about this. Use your strengths. You're too young. He will outmatch you on strength. Use your speed." And I used the wrong two. So there we go. TOO. Chris quickly took stock of the situation. He had lost the dirk again, which was laying at the feet of his target. His right hand was mangled and useless. It would need time to heal, and he couldn't use his gun. Facing the target wasn't working. He changed plans. As powerful as the werebear was, he still needed to breathe, right? Chris shot across the room, going wide and jumping over the bed to get behind the werebear. He jumped up on the werebear's back, using his good arm to go around his neck, choking him, all before the target knew what was happening. The werebear tried to reach behind him to grab Chris, but his arms wouldn't reach. His muscles were too big. Chris used his weight to pull back against his neck even harder. It was working. It was working. It was harder for the target to breathe. He was flailing, trying to get Chris off him. The target was gasping for air, but even then he was able to calm himself and stop struggling. He then began to twist, throwing Chris from side to side. Chris used all his strength in a desperate attempt to hang on. The bear continued twisting and was able to catch Chris's leg. He used it to pull Chris off his neck, allowing him to breathe once again. Chris was now dangling upside down in front of the werebear, the claws deep in his leg. The bear tried several times to gut Chris with his other claws, but Chris managed to avoid it by twisting and bending his body. He glanced down and saw the dirk. It was just out of arm's reach. He needed to get free, but the grip on his leg was iron tight. He had thought about using his gun again, but he knew Draven would be upset. Maybe I could get him to lower me. Despite the pain, Chris was able to segment it in his mind. He began to use his speed to punch the werebear faster than the werebear could deal with, all while dodging and hanging upside down. He was only able to punch him in the sternum, but it was enough to get him to lower the arm holding him. He was able to grab the dagger off the floor. Chris quickly took the chance to stab it into the werebear's heart. As the dagger went in, he fell to the ground as the werebear went unconscious. Chris pulled himself free of the claws and stood up. He made sure he didn't put all the weight on his injured leg while it healed. He looked down at the hand that was mangled. He wiggled his fingers. It wasn't all the way healed, but at least the tendons were knitted back together. He looked down on his target. He was still in his were form. He wasn't dead. Over the call link, he heard Draven say, "Good job, but about as smooth as I expected for your first time. Now finish it." Chris knelt next to the werebear. He grabbed the dagger and moved it from side to side, making a cut big enough to get his hands in, but without taking the dagger out of the heart. He slipped his hands in, pushed them down between the ribcage, breaking a few ribs in the process. He gripped the heart and ripped it out of the body. The dirk dropped to the floor. The target's body reverted back into a human with a hole in its chest. Chris stood up and sniffed at the heart. The blood smelled like what he remembered blood smelled like when he was mortal. Unlike human blood, there was no sweet smell, no intoxicating odor. There was no inborn desire to drink this blood. He turned and looked out the window, showing off the heart before speaking into his mic. "There, done." Suddenly, it felt like everything in the room was vibrating. The whole world shook with a gentle hum, a hum that was getting louder. Everything was turning white, like when a picture is overexposed. Then there was nothing. Chris crumpled to the floor, the heart flopped out of his hand and rested on the ground. I'm gonna take a drink here. April 19th, 1996, New York, 10:16 p.m. Philip sat in a large brown leather chair reading a newspaper. The walls of the room were covered in bookcases full of books. There was a leather couch opposite to the chair with a low-standing dark wooden table between them. It was dim. The only light was coming from a small fire in the hearth and a standing lamp. The faint smell of burning wood perfumed the air. In the corner was a small desk with a chair. There was a closed laptop sitting on the desk. Philip sighed as he put down the paper and leaned back in his chair. It was a rare moment where all his plans were in motion and there was nothing for him to do but wait to see how they turned out. He was not used to relaxing. It was stressful doing nothing. He looked up at the clock. It was the evening, but for his kind, it was early morning. He sighed as he lifted the paper back up and turned the page. The newspaper read, "Insert a news headline about current events of April 1996. Basically, I have to go and look up some kind of a headline to put there. Philip tried to keep up on current events. A lot of his kind chose to ignore it and just live out their lives in their own little world. He liked to keep in touch with the humans that inhabited the planet. It allowed him to better live among them and to help them out in his own way. Thanks for the look, Locke. Appreciate that. Philip began to feel a sudden nagging at the back of his mind, like he had forgotten something. At first he ignored it, flipping the page in the newspaper, but he couldn't get it out of his head. It became stronger, and he realized what it was. He was being called. It had been a long time since one of his children had tried to call him. He thought about ignoring it, closing his mind, but he had nothing going on, and it could be important. Or a trap. VR Labrat, hello, and thank you for the lurk. I appreciate that. Philip folded the newspaper and put it on the table. He sat up straight in the chair and closed his eyes. He lowered his defenses and focused on the sensation in his mind. Thanks, Labrat. VR Labrat. Yeah, it's good to be back. I was a little anxious, but getting into it. He lowered his defenses and focused on the sensation in his mind, allowing it to overtake him. Gradually, the feeling became stronger, morphing from a latent thought into a full-blown feeling, encompassing his conscious mind. There was a familiar sensation, one he knew well. Younger vampires who have more than one child can't always tell who is calling them. Let's see what it says here. No. It takes time and effort to learn the... Oh, I should probably just say ignore once. Bam. It takes time and effort to learn the unique connections each vampire can make and how those affect the mind of the elder vampire. Philip was no young vampire. It didn't take long for him to sort out who this calling was coming from. It was Draven. Philip was a little surprised. Draven could only be calling him for two reasons. There was an emergency that he couldn't handle alone, which hadn't happened in many centuries, or Draven was setting up a trap. Philip trusted Draven more than any other vampire, but he knew he could never fully trust another of his kind. Time changes a vampire, just like it does with humans, but humans don't have to fight against the inborn bloodlust that vampires do. It can twist a person in ways most people wouldn't expect. Still, trap or not, he thought it was best to find Draven and answer the calling. Oh, that should be a capital. He would be cautious. He was always cautious. He focused his mind on the calling again. It was starting to pull him. He could feel it. It was urging him to go west. He focused on that feeling, letting it grow stronger. Younger vampires don't have the experience or focus to delve deeper into a calling, to help pinpoint the location, but Philip could. It is somewhere northwest, about 2,000 miles away. He opened his eyes and stood up. He walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out a large atlas of the United States. He walked over to the desk and put it down, opening it to a page of the whole country. Looking at the map, he almost intuitively knew that his destination was Montana, but it was hard for him to be specific as to where in Montana. Once he got closer, he would be able to narrow down exactly where just by following the calling. He sat down and opened the laptop, opening a web browser. He went to a flight booking service and purchased the next flight he could to Billings, Montana. Let's take a drink here. April 21st, 1996, Montana. Oh, I gotta fix that. There's supposed to be a comma there. Montana, 2:56 a.m. Draven was sitting in a chair in his living room. He was watching Chris, who was laying comatose on the couch. It had been nearly 14 days since Chris had gone unconscious. His blood was still flowing, albeit at a much slower pace than was normal. All of his injuries he had sustained healed at a normal rate for a vampire. Draven had tried all he knew, which admittedly wasn't much. He'd never seen a vampire fall unconscious like this unless there was magic at play, or they were entering the sleep. It had been an age since Draven had seen much magic, and Chris was much too young to have been able to invoke the sleep. Draven was awoken out of his thoughts as he heard a knock on the front door. He got up, walked down the hallway, and opened it. On the other side was Philip, or as Draven knew him, Theron. Yes, there should be a comma there. Hello, Theron. took you longer to get here than I anticipated. Yes, well, I've taken to not using my powers if it can be avoided. It's too easy to be caught using them these days. What is so urgent that you would call for me? And that too is supposed to have a TOO fixed. Draven waved Philip in and closed the door behind him. It's Christopher. Something's happened to him. They walked down the hall to the living room while talking. I don't know what is happening to him. One minute he was fighting a werebear, and the next minute he was laying unconscious on the floor. Once I realized he wasn't waking up, I took him to one of my safe houses. That was nearly 14 days ago. They entered the living room, and Philip walked over to the couch where Chris was laying down. There was a fireplace with a roaring fire. It made up most of the light in the room. Either side of the fireplace, there was a chair. To either side of the fireplace, there was a chair, and fireplace is one word. Placed in such a way that you could see both the fire and the couch. Philip looked down at Chris. He was perfectly still, and his face was unusually pale, even for a vampire. Philip looked back at Draven. You say he was fighting a werebear? Draven nodded. Philip looked back to Draven. Well, I don't see how a werebear could do this, and magic is rare enough in this age. In fact, mostly absent from the world. This looks like he's entered the sleep, but he's far too young to have figured out how to do that. Draven walked up to Philip and stood next to him, looking down at Chris. I agree. I don't know what this is. There was a time nearly 9 months ago where he fell unconscious. We were doing an endurance exercise, trying to train, while not drinking any blood. After a few days, he went unconscious. At the time, I thought it was lack of blood. I gave him some blood, and he woke up in a few hours. Philip nodded. I'm assuming you tried that again? Draven gave a side glance to Philip. Of course I tried that. It was the first thing I tried. I've been feeding him every day, but hardly any of it goes down his throat. I don't know what to do, and I thought you might have some answers. It's why I called you. Philip put the back of his hand on Chris's forehead. It was cold and clammy, not unlike a corpse. He frowned. It's not unlike the sleep, but his body has shut down. Well, he's only 30. He couldn't have known how to go into sleep. Not voluntarily, anyways. Besides, if you have been feeding him every day, he should have woken by now. Draven nodded. That's why I've called you. You're the most knowledgeable of our kind that I know, and you have a personal interest in the boy. I thought if anyone could help, you could. Philip turned, facing Draven. Thank you, I appreciate the trust you put in me. Something else is at work here, and I'm not sure what. I could try and relive the last few moments before he passed out. Maybe they'll give us some... Chris began to stir, and Philip stopped mid-sentence. Both him and Draven looked... Hey Chris, thank you for the follow, I appreciate that. Let's see, him should not be capitalized, alright. Both him and Draven looked down at Chris. His eyes were fluttering open and a groan escaped his mouth. Awesome! Thanks for checking it out after seeing the live message, I appreciate that. How you doing? Both him and Draven looked down at Chris. His eyes were fluttering open and a groan escaped his mouth. Draven and Philip glanced at each other, but had a perplexed look on his face. Draven looked over to the clock and said half under his breath, nearly 14 days to the minute. He looked over at Philip and asked in hushed tones, That can't be a coincidence, can it? Philip said nothing and walked away. He started pacing in the room, lost in his own thoughts. Chris sat up and looked at Draven, confusion in his eyes. What happened? Where are we? Are we in Montana's safe house? How did we get here? Oh, don't feel guilty. I don't stream very often. I'm getting back to it. I was streaming, it was about a year ago that I was doing it on a regular basis, but then life stuff happened and I kind of fell off on streaming. I do stream once a month. I do a LARP chat stream, but it's a random time each month, so it's not very consistent. But I do it every month. And then I just started back up the writing stream today. So there is no reason why you would have known that I stream. Oh wow, struggling, you're making Halloween decorations. Cool. I do enjoy the fall season and Halloween. I just haven't put any decorations up. I don't really have any decorations anymore, so... But it is one of my favorite seasons. Have been watching spooky movies once every day, and although I've missed a couple days, so I'm only at 15 movies, I think. But it's been pretty fun. Ferris sat up and looked at Draven, confusion in his eyes. What happened? Where are we? Are we in near Montana safe house? How did we get here? Draven tried to calm Chris down, speaking softly. Yes, we are in Montana. You fell and Ooh, not feel. You fell. You fell unconscious, and when I couldn't figure out why I brought you... You fell unconscious, and when I couldn't figure out why, I brought you here so we would be safe. Oh, you don't have an act for decorating? Well, it sounds like you're having fun, at least, you know, making decorations, which is cool. Yes, we are in Montana. You fell unconscious, and when I couldn't figure out why, I brought you here so we would be safe. Do you remember anything? Chris lowered his eyes, concentrating on his last thoughts. I had just removed the target's heart. I was holding it up so you could see. Chris paused, collecting his thoughts. Then there was, I don't know, a vibration, like the air was hitting my skin. It got stronger, then everything went white. And then I woke up here. Draven frowned. Strange. Draven was interrupted as Chris noticed that they were not alone in the room. He nodded towards Philip, asking in a slight disgusted tone, "What is he doing here?" Draven looked back at Philip, pacing the room. I called for him. You were unconscious for 14 days. I didn't know what else to do. I thought he might be able to help. Do I have him to thank for being awake? Draven shook his head. No, you seemed to wake up on your own. Good. I'd hate to think I owe him something. Chris looked over at Philip. Aren't you going to say hello to me, Oliver? You've come all this way. Philip stopped pacing and walked back to the couch. Hello, Christopher. And it's Philip now. Chris glared at Philip. It's Chris now, Philip. I'm better now. Shouldn't you be on your way, or are you going to twist what happened to me into some sort of advantage for yourself? I'm no longer that naive human you manipulated. You can't... Philip interrupted Chris. Can you try and find a little faith that you can place in me? If you can do that, I can help. We need to work together to unravel this mystery. Craven was taken back. What do you think is going on? Philip ignored the question and asked one of his own. Have you noticed anything different about you? Different than other vampires? Chris sighed. What do you mean? You're doing alright, but you're stressing out because not measuring up to the expectations. Because a good while before anyone sees me in one of these Lost Home Design episodes. Oh, that's what you... Oh, okay. So you're working on the house competition. I thought you were like literally making Halloween decorations at your house for like your house, real life house. Yeah, I can imagine that being really stressful. Especially for a competition. Is there anything you can see the other vampires don't see or don't feel? Chris shrugged. Perhaps. I seem to have the ability to tell if someone is human or not. I can usually tell what they are. I also get fleeting moments of emotions from other people. Philip nodded. It sounds like you might be an aura reader, exceedingly rare. I know there was something special about you. As you grow and explore your powers, you'll better understand them. You'll be able to better control them too, but that doesn't explain this. Is there something else you're not telling me? Even something small and unimportant? Chris paused a moment, thinking, well, there is something else, but I'm not sure if it's anything. Like I said, I can tell when someone is a vampire, even before I was turned. Yes and no, I'm physically setting up real decorations outside my IRL house. I'm not making them, like, creating them. Oh, just setting them up? Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, the walk thing was an offhand joke. Okay. Well, I hope it's going pretty well. I kind of miss decorating the house. It's probably not going to be able to do that this year because I don't really have the extra money to go out and buy decorations. But maybe next year. Also, I live in an apartment, so I can't really go outside and decorate. You can only just put some stuff inside the house. Chris paused a moment, thinking, well, there is something else, but I'm not sure if it's anything. Like I said, I can tell when someone's a vampire. Even before I was turned, I had this feeling about you. I wasn't always aware of it, but sometimes your presence would seep through and I'd feel it. I felt something similar when I met Draven. For a time, I thought it was because you were both vampires. But since then, I felt this way about a few humans as well. I just thought I was imagining it, or maybe that it was people's natural presence. I'm not sure. Philip waited a moment to say anything, lost in thought, before speaking. Do you still remember what I taught you about meditation? Chris looked up at Philip quizzically and nodded. I want you to try and go into a deep state of meditation. Empty your mind. Let the energy of your subconscious overcome you, and let's see what will happen. Chris looked over at Draven questioningly. Draven nodded back in reply and said, you can use the room down the hallway on your right. Chris stood up and started walking out of the room. He looked back at them doubtfully before entering the hallway. After Chris left, Draven looked at Philip. What are you thinking? He's young. Nothing will happen. He can't possibly do it. Philip answered, I don't know. He's special and something is happening to him. A bit of self-reflection never hurt. I don't know what will happen. Chris opened the door to the room. He'd been to this house once before, but never in this room. It was void of any furniture to sit on, and there was no windows. Near the walls of the room were various waist-high candle stands. He sighed as he entered the room, closing the door behind him. He walked around the room, lighting the candles before he walked to the center and sat down, crossing his legs. He thought to himself, this is ridiculous. How is meditation supposed to help? He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts play across his conscious mind. It took some time, but eventually he was able to tune out the content of those thoughts, leaving only the impressions of them on his mind. He calmed his body, relaxing, embracing nothingness. It felt like an hour had passed, but nothing happened. He opened his eyes, breaking his concentration. He felt relaxed, calm. The hunger was at bay, nothing he hadn't felt before. He had done this often as a human, and occasionally as a vampire. He had found that it helped him maintain control over his darker impulses. However, he had never considered using the control over his body that he had gained as a vampire to further deepen his meditations. He closed his eyes again and focused on his body. He stopped breathing, having no need for it, stilling his body. He then concentrated on his heart. He slowly began to lower his heartbeat. It took some time, but he got his heart to the point where it nearly didn't beat at all. He had never lowered his heartbeat to this level before. He'd always used his ability to increase his heart rate when he needed to pass as human. Reducing it was much more difficult. He was unsure of how long he was in this state. It could have been hours, or it could have just been a few moments. It is impossible for him to tell. Time had little meaning. His body was as still as it could be. His mind as blank as it had ever been. Suddenly, he sensed his body crumple to the floor, but he couldn't feel it as it happened. It was just a thought in the back of his mind. Chris opened his eyes. He had no idea where he was, but it was surreal. There was no space. There was a black void at his feet and whiteness beyond that. There was nothing else. He took a step forward, and while he felt like he moved, nothing changed. The last thing he remembered was falling unconscious. He thought to himself, "Is this a dream?" He bent down and felt the ground, but while his hand stopped, he felt nothing up against it. He had no idea how he wasn't falling through the emptiness. He tried to wake himself. He slapped his face, pinched his arm, all the traditional ways one is supposed to shock oneself out of a dream. But nothing worked. It only stung. He was unsure of how long he had been there. For a moment it seemed like an eternity, but yet it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. He let out a grunt of frustration at not being sure what to do. Suddenly out of nowhere, there was an older, gruff female voice that emanated in front of him. Is it him? Did we find him? A second female voice, one that sounded smoother, came from his right side and replied, "I believe so." Chris looked to his right. Let's see what it says. Oh, I guess I don't need the comma there. Chris looked to his right, but couldn't see where the voice was coming from. But he spoke anyways. Hello? Who are you? A third voice spoke from behind him. This one sounded like it came from a younger female. It was a bit higher pitched. It is him. But he found us. The first voice spoke again, sounding slightly confused. He did? No, I think he met us halfway. Either way, it wasn't supposed to happen this way. It's never happened this way before. Chris was confused and a little offended. He didn't like being ignored. Show yourself. The voices stopped talking and nothing happened for a moment. Then a white, dense mist, formless, but about 3 feet wide and 5 or 6 feet, not feet, gotta fix that, 6 feet tall appeared in front of him. It seemed to glow slightly from the inside. Then from the side in the right, 2 small clouds appeared along the knew this would be confusing. Then from the side in the right, I should say from the right side. Then from the right side, 2 smaller clouds appeared, although one on the right was a bit thinner and the one behind him shorter. Oh. You gotta actually say that someone appeared from behind him, so yeah, there we go. Then from the right side and behind him, 2 similar clouds appeared, although the one on the right was a bit thinner and the one behind him shorter. Oh, don't worry. I understand that. You can just hang out and chill and lurk. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing to say. That's great. I just appreciate that you're here. The first cloud spoke, and as it did so, the light slightly fluttered to the pattern of its voice. I guess that is possessive. That. What have you become? Chris looked confused. What do you mean? The voice from the cloud behind him spoke. You're not as you should be. Chris looked back as it spoke, and then whipped his head to the right as the cloud to the right spoke as well. We cannot see you. Before turning back to the one in front of him, who spoke again in quick succession. You are no longer human. Christopher shook his head. No, I'm a vampire. The mist seemed to pause before the large one spoke. You are part of the Dark Weave. This has never happened. It shouldn't happen. The others won't like this. Christopher looked confused. Others? The Dark Weave? The middle-sized cloud responded. Yes, the gods. I don't know why there is... Oh. The middle-sized cloud responded, yes, the gods. Before the one in front said, the Dark Weave was created when the Curse of the Undying was performed. The smaller one continued, it matters not, he'll perform as expected. The larger cloud finishes. Finish. The time is now. Christopher continued to be confused. Time? What time? Time for what? The smaller mist boat. The time of prophecy has come. Christopher looked back. The time of prophecy? The mist in front of him continued, yes, but this time it is unclear. The dark weave is hidden from us. The one on the right finished. It interferes with the weave. It was never meant to be created. Its threads moved unseen. I always liked that flashing emote. The three mist orbs moved, speaking in English, and they converged on him. You must find the child. You must find the child. Then his world wouldn't blink once more. Chris opened his eyes in surprise. He was laying on the floor. He knew what he had to do. He had to go to the city of Freiburg at once. Freiburg. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't speak German. But it's a city that I needed to use, so. Philip and Draven were sitting quietly in their chairs on either side of the fire. They were shaken out of their own thoughts as Chris walked into the room. Chris looked at the men sitting quietly in their respective chairs. They looked up at him, waiting for him to speak. Chris wasn't sure what he'd just experienced, and he wasn't sure where to start. All he knew was that he had a nearly overwhelming urge to go east. He did his best to resist the urge as he walked over to the couch. Philip and Draven said nothing as he sat down. Chris waited a moment, his elbows on his knees as he looked down at the carpet, gathering his thoughts. Where do I start? I have no idea what happened to me. He moved his eyes to glance up at the other two quietly looking at him. They must know something. Draven, I would trust to tell me the truth. That is, if he chooses to say anything at all. Then there was Philip. He couldn't help but have a grimace spread across his face for that few seconds as Philip entered his thoughts. I don't trust him to tell the truth. Maybe to a point, but he's likely to obfuscate the truth as he is to illuminate the truth. What other choice do I have, though? I need to know what they know. Chris sighed as he straightened up. He decided to find out some truths about the situation before he told his own tale of the events. How long has it been? It was Draven who answered. About an hour. Chris was surprised he didn't let it show on his face. He had been certain it was longer than an hour, but with what had happened he wasn't sure about anything anymore. Why did you want me to go in there? What did you think would happen? It was Philip who chose to speak. I wasn't sure. When you were unconscious before, you looked like you were in the sleep. It was the only explanation, and even that made no sense. I've never heard of anyone being forced into that state. Christopher interrupted. The sleep? Maybe one day I will write a story about an Italian vampire who believed he can't have garlic due to false propaganda, going on an epic journey to locate the other spice in the world that tastes similar, only to find out that she could have been having garlic this whole time. That would be pretty funny. I think that'd be pretty great. Maybe someday you'll do that. That'd be awesome. If you do that, there's a writing channel in Locks or in the Discord, and you could post it there, and I would take a look at it. Chris interrupted. The sleep. What is that? Philip paused and looked over at Draven. He is yours. Draven shrugged. I have no reason to tell him. He is too young. I saw no reason to tell him. He is too young to need to know. Continue. You may be the one to explain it. Philip continued. The sleep is a state that a vampire can reach when he is unconscious and no longer needs blood to survive. A vampire in the sleep can continue in the state for weeks, months, decades, and even centuries in some cases. Each vampire uses it for their own means, and their subconscious expresses it a little differently for each vampire. The concept of time goes out the window. Some use it to explore their own unconsciousness. A vampire can learn a lot and strengthen themselves by using the sleep. Some just use it as a means to hop through time, while some others use it to hide or even gain power or inner insight. There are risks, mainly that you go... Sure thing, I don't write much, but I enjoy taking a very serious tone for very satirical things. That's good. Vampire can learn... Oh, where was I? There are risks, mainly that you are not aware of your surroundings. If care is not taken, you are at your most vulnerable. Going into sleep is a tricky business. It's difficult to enter, it takes time to learn, and you need a certain mastery over your body that younger vampires lack. Christopher raised an eyebrow. If only an elder vampire can enter this state, why did you have me try? Philip sighed, slightly agitated, but he continued. As I said, you looked like you were in the sleep. It only makes sense that you could try and enter the state naturally. I didn't know if it was going to work, but I figured it was worth a try. Was I right? Chris wanted to learn more about the sleep, but Chris, as much as he hated to admit it, realized Philip was probably right. He needed to move on from this topic. I don't know if I entered the sleep, but something happened. I was in a deep state of meditation, like I had been before, but this time I did all I could to slow down my heart and make my body still, as if I were truly dead. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, I felt like I separated from my body, and I realized that I fell unconscious on the ground. Then there was nothing. After what seemed like an age, I was suddenly somewhere else. Some sort of empty void, yet I was on solid ground. I could move, yet I could not. Movement meant nothing because there was no marker to indicate anything changed. Both Philip and Draven looked slightly taken aback. Draven looked over at Philip. He did it? Philip grinned slightly as he spoke. I think he did. This is amazing. I knew he was special. I was right to keep my eye on him. Draven nodded slightly in agreement. It is true, he is special, but this? I've never heard of one so young, only 30 years. The youngest I've heard of someone going into sleep was when they were at least 2 centuries old. Even then, once they truly go into sleep, it usually takes them much longer till they are able to voluntarily exit a true sleep state. They usually need help to awaken this quickly. It's hard to believe he's already mastered those 2 things. Philip nodded. It is, but it seems to be the case here. After all my years, to see something new like this. I never thought. Chris cleared his throat. May I continue? Chris wasn't sure how to handle this new information. He knew something about excelling. He was single-minded in his pursuit of martial excellence when he was immortal, and was used to being unique in that way. When he became a vampire, he was told that he was able to handle his darker impulses better than other vampires his age. He always assumed that it had something to do with Philip and how he helped train him as a mortal. He had the unique experience of being raised to become a vampire, even though it was without his knowledge. He had always assumed that this was what led him to excel as a vampire. Now he began to realize that maybe there was some force unknown to him that was influencing his life in ways he never could have imagined, more than just being a vampire. Draven really never talked about the reasons for wanting Chris to become a vampire, other than saying he sensed something special in him as immortal. He had known it was pointless to push Draven to tell him more. Draven kept his promise. Chris never caught him lying. Draven always told him the truth, but there were more than a few times when he just blatantly ignored the subject. It was annoying, but he had to make a choice between who would turn him, Draven or Philip, and Philip had spent his whole life hiding the truth from him. When the time came, he chose Draven, and he's never regretted it, though this was the first time he thought that he might get some answers. Philip and Draven both stopped looking at each other and turned back to Christopher, who they seemed to have momentarily... Oh, I wrote it. So what I'm doing right now is editing my story to get back into where I was, because I haven't worked on this for... Gosh, it probably has been at least a year. And I'm only my short stories. I'm making a point to only work on them on stream, so I can record the whole entire process of writing the story. So yeah, and I wrote 17 pages, and I have about 3 pages of outlines. I know I will definitely get through editing the first 17 pages today, and hopefully I had stopped in the middle of the scene, and so hopefully I will be able to finish that scene. Yeah. So hopefully you're enjoying it. Philip and Draven both stopped looking at each other and turned back to Christopher, who they seemed to have momentarily forgot was there. Despite the conversation being about him, it was Philip who spoke. He sounded a little surprised. There was more? You weren't in there long. I suspect you may have had a confusing experience, maybe your own thoughts manifesting in some way. It's hard to imagine it was coherent your first time, especially for such a short time. Chris had no trouble admitting to himself that he had a confusing experience, but he thought it seemed coherent, didn't it? For once he decided he might know something that Philip didn't. His desire to keep a secret from Philip was overridden by his desire to get answers. If he was going to get any, he figured it would be from one of these two. Christopher continued. Yes, there was more. 3, what looked like self-contained mist creatures, found me and spoke to me. Apparently they had been looking for me for some time. Each one seemed to be a different size and spoke to me in a different voice. There was no context for what they said, so it was hard to follow. They mentioned something about gods. They spoke about 2 weaves, one called the Dark Weave. I was somehow part of this Dark Weave, and it surprised them. Why is it telling me it's wrong? No, and it surprised them. Unlike the other weave, they could not easily see the Dark Weave. Something about this Dark Weave being created by the Curse of the Undying. Okay, I don't think I actually said anything about the Curse of the Undying, so I need to go back and check that. Because they need to actually say that. No, they did say it. Okay. I was wrong. Then there is something they expected me to do, something to do with the timer of the prophecy. I'm to find a child of some sort. At the end of the vision, they moved closer, nearly touching me. Then I woke up with a desire to travel east, to some city I'd never heard of, Feyberg. Philip seemed at a loss for words. He leaned back into his chair. A smile began to cross his face, which turned into a grin. Then he burst into laughter. Chris was taken aback. He looked over at Draven questioningly, who shrugged slightly in response. He turned back to Philip, whose laughter was subsiding. What's so funny? Philip sat up straight in his chair once again. Those were laughs of joy and relief. It's finally time, after all the waiting. The death, the boredom, the planning. It's finally time. I found you. You of all people, I never believed this would happen, but I did. But it did. I hoped and planned to be alive to see these times, but to find you, a presage, in this menace-starved world, it's more than I could have hoped for. Draven snapped his head in Philip's direction and spoke while Chris was trying to recover from the shock of Philip's unexpected and confusing response. Presage? After all this time? Does this mean... There should be 3 dots there. There we go. Draven's voice trailed off. He couldn't even seem to dare to speak out loud. That's probably 2 words. Yep. Philip nodded excitedly, still smiling. It does. I'm certain of it. The time is nearly at hand. We have lived to see the end, and we will be able to influence the beginning. Christopher managed to regain his voice, speaking a bit more forcefully than he intended. What do you mean, presage? What is that, and how do you know I am it? Do you understand all this gobbledygook that I heard? Gods, weaves, prophecies? It all sounds like nonsense. Talk to me, damn it! Philip's smile didn't falter at the intensity of Christopher's question. You are a Presage, a herald of sorts. I've never met one, not even when I was mortal. They are rare, even when the flow of magic is in full force, and to find one, it's extraordinary. There hasn't been one in countless ages. I have been waiting for you longer than you can imagine. You are a sign, or more precisely, you will be the sign that the prophecy is at hand. Christopher threw up his hand in trying to pause the conversation. Wait a minute, prophecy? Is that a real thing? Wait. They were talking about gods too. Are you saying gods are real? Philip chuckled slightly. Prophecy is real, but prophecy is rare. Then there are different types of prophecy, and the way prophecy unfolds is complicated. For now, just know that prophecy is real. I want to change this paragraph here. Wait a minute, prophecy? Is that a real thing? Wait. Okay, I did write it right. Okay. For now, just know that prophecy is real and you're a part of it. As to gods, they are real too. Oh yes, they are real. I've never met a true god, but they once walked the lands. Some of their children still do if you know where to look. Philip paused, asking Chris, this must be a lot to take in. Chris nodded. So much that I find it hard to believe. Prophecy, sure, I can believe that. I'm a vampire after all. The supernatural is real, some magic, and prophecy, why not? But actual gods? Next you're going to tell me that the Christian God exists and religion isn't some sort of fraud. Chris looked over at Draven, who was quietly but intently watching the events unfold. Is he for real? At being addressed, Draven relaxed and sighed as he leaned back into his chair. He is. Gods are real. We have no idea if the Christian God is real, but it's possible. There are gods that are so old that their names have nearly been forgotten to time. There might even be some gods who have been lost to time. You are a Presage, a title and power from an age long past, an age only hinted at now in myth and legend. You thought your life was torn asunder when you were turned. Now you are something that you can't even fathom. Something lost to the ages. Something that Philip has waited for, something I lost faith in. Something I thought would never come. I lost faith in, something I thought would never come. Listen to Philip. He is better suited for this tale. It has been his reason to survive through the ages. Chris looked from Draven to Philip. You speak in terms of ages. I know you are both old. Draven has chosen not to tell me how old, and I've come to respect that, but how old are you both? Chris waited for what felt like an eternity. He felt lost like never before. How old was Draven? How old was Philip? Draven, more so than Philip, was obviously out of place in this time. That was disconcerting enough. Draven never mentioned his age. During their time, they had little contact with other vampires, other than to kill them. But he got to the feeling that Draven was older than many of the vampires he had met. Although Draven did let something slip once about his past, something about the Covenant, the agreement between the major vampire factions created in the 11th century, the birth of what might be best thought of as a vampire government. Draven once said something that made it seem like he was there at the founding of the Covenant, making him at least 1,000 years old. Very old, but not the oldest living vampire he has heard of. But that was all he knew. Now he was sitting in front of two vampires he knew were over 1,000 years old, talking about magic, prophecy, and gods like it was an everyday occurrence. Like it was an everyday occurrence. They were talking in terms of ages. What does that mean? Chris could only guess at what time meant to vampires of their age. What kind of perspective must they have on the history of humanity? What may have felt like an eternity was actually only a few moments before Philip spoke. Perhaps it will help if I unpack what has happened to you. I can help put your experience into context. Believe it or not, you told me about something I didn't know existed. The Dark Weave. Your phone is about to die. I can be back later, but in the interim, I hope you keep clarity of mind while proofreading. I'm no expert at writing, but my only critique would be that it helps to replace every other mission of vampire to something else. To be bloodsucker, or this form, or directly in figure monstrosity and parasitic immortal. This can help keep things fresh. Again, I'm no expert, so maybe this is terrible advice. It just may be inkling. Please have a good night. Have a good one. Yeah, no, you're right on. If you repeat stuff too much, it can get monotonous. And thank you for letting me know that. When I edit it again, I will go back and be more mindful of that and think of other terms to come up with. That is good advice. And sometimes you can only figure that kind of stuff out by having someone else listen to the story. At least for me. Thanks for coming by. I appreciate that. Yep. Be well as well. Perhaps it will help if I unpack what has happened to you. I can help put your experience into context. Believe it or not, you told me about something I didn't know existed. The Dark Weave. I'll start with what I know for sure and end on speculation. This might take a while to explain, so please leave questions till the end of my tale. Chris narrowed his eyes. Philip was still being evasive. Draven wasn't being much help either. He asked a question. He thought it was time for answers. Yet it sounded like he was going to have to wait a little while longer. He sighed and decided to lean back into the couch. Very well, continue. Philip paused a moment before continuing, organizing his thoughts. I think what you saw is the three fates. You may know of what I speak. They have been mentioned in human lore throughout the ages. Human lore through the ages. They are real, and they are the caretakers of the weave. From a modern perspective, you might say they are caretakers of the existence of linear time. Traditionally, they are seen as three women, a younger one, a middle-aged one, and an elderly one. They often deal in prophecy and making sure that time continues uninterrupted. They are not interested in deciding the fate of existence. I'm going to say they are not interested in deciding the fate of existence, but maintaining. They are not interested in deciding the fate of existence, but in maintaining it. Philip asking to not be interrupted. Despite Philip asking to not be interrupted, Chris spoke up and asked what, somewhat incredulously, so the fates are gods? I met gods? Philip let out a slight sigh of exasperation. No, they are not gods. They are said to have a divine spark, but they are something else. Something more fundamental to the nature of existence. There is no word for what they are. They do speak to the gods, however. May I continue? Christopher shrugged in response, and Philip continued. Long ago, it was thought of as a physical weave, but it might be best thought of in terms of metaphor for linear time and all the branches of time that can take place. Prophecy is where the lines of time can branch, and the actions of mortals can make a larger difference to how the future unfolds. Presage is the manifestation of a marker within this weave, a time of drastic change, where the weave is uncertain of how the future will come together, where the weave is most vulnerable to the actions of mortals. Chris interrupted, the frustration written plainly on his face. So I'm not normal? I mean, I wasn't really a human before I was turned into a vampire. My whole life has been some predetermined plan. I never had a choice? Philip sighed and spoke with care rather than annoyance at being interrupted. You are always human, but you are also a presage. If you are speaking about free will, I'm sorry. No, from my understanding, your future will always be limited in this regard. I'm going to reread that sentence. I'm sorry. No, from my understanding, your future was always limited in that regard. As a presage, your birth and death have been predetermined. It was known in my time that the fates will keep you alive until you have announced the birth of the child who will center You have been announced the birth of the child who will be central to the prophecy. Your life and your purpose has been predetermined. However, you're able to make most of your choices about how your life unfolds. In that way, you have free will. Yeah, it should be have. Chris thought about what Philip was saying. It was hard to get his mind around, but he thought he was beginning to understand some of his rudimentary learning about philosophy was kicking in from when he was human. Then it sunk in. Philip said his birth and death were predetermined. Wait, my death is predetermined? What do you mean? Philip leaned back into the couch. He sighed as a frown crept across his face before he reluctantly continued. Yes, your death. The Presage is born for one reason and one reason only, and that is to announce the time of great change. Once they have done this, they die. No one knows why for certain. It's assumed that if they were to live, they would potentially wield a power unknown to the world. There is hope, though. It sounds like you are part of the Dark Weave the Fates spoke of. It sounds like you are part of this Dark Weave the Fates have spoke about. I'm going to rewrite that sentence, I think. There is hope, though. It sounds like you are part of the Dark Weave. You are part of this Dark Weave that the Fates spoke of. There is hope, though. It sounds like you are part of this Dark Weave that the Fates spoke of. That's better. I think its existence allowed you to become a vampire. Knowing now that you are a Presage, I'm surprised you are allowed to become a vampire. It rewrites what I know of what a Presage is. May yet survive, but I admit this hope is small. Chris sat there in silence. He was being faced with his own mortality. His whole world view was shook, yet he didn't feel lost. Confused, but not lost. Didn't know how, but he knew what he must do. He must go east. He must find Freiburg. He must find the child. He thought to himself, I know what I must do. I want to do it. I want to leave right now. But why? What if I resist? If I don't follow what has become my innermost desire, will I live? Chris looked at Philip. What if I choose not to do it? What if I choose not to find the child of prophecy? Philip raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure. I'm not sure you have a choice. Presages were even rare when their existence was known. I'm not sure you have a choice, but the Dark Weave... Philip trailed off, momentarily in thought before he brought his attention back to the conversation and asked Chris, tell me again, what did they say about the Dark Weave? There may be some hope. Chris replayed the scene again in his head. I'm going to say mind. Well, he spoke. I believe they said the Dark Weave was created when the Curse of the Undying was performed. They also said that it was the reason they couldn't find more. Or what? They also said that it was the reason they couldn't find me. Philip thought a moment. I only speculate, but that seems to mean that there is another version of how reality can unfold. One that is populated with the undead, one that is unseen by the fates and therefore the gods. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a presage since the Curse of the Undying was performed. You, I, Draven, all the living dead might not be taken into account in the weave. Who knows what that will mean for the future? You may yet live, I do not know. Chris's mind was not put at ease, but at least there was a grain of hope that he could hold on to. He wanted to ask so many more questions. What the Curse of the Undying was. What did that have to do with him? He never thought that he would be able to get as much out of Philip as he had, even if it was finding it hard to believe. Even if he was finding it hard to believe. He decided he wouldn't ask about the curse or more about these weaves. He was afraid Philip would cease being so open, so he decided to stay on track. So I may live, but it sounds like the chances are slim. Not as comforting as I'd like, but I'll take it. You keep referring to the gods. They exist. What does this mean for religion? Philip smiled slightly. Oh yes, the gods and religion. Gods are real. Religion is often used by them to facilitate their will, or at least they used to. It is theorized that since mana has dried up on this world, at least compared to long ago, the gods have been unable to exert much, if any, of their will. I don't really know. I have no idea which religion has a real god attached to it and which doesn't anymore. Some religions are descendants of old religions. Much of the truths about the gods have been muddled with human interpretations over the millennia. I do not know what this means for them as we move into the time of prophecy. As to the gods themselves, they have not walked the physical world in a long time, much longer than I've been alive. Still, their footprints can be seen, and even to this day, if you know where to look... Oops, I read that wrong. Still, the footprints can be seen even to this day, if you know where to look. There are even children of the gods still walking the earth, but that has very little bearing on the present. Chris thought to himself, well, at least he doesn't seem all-knowing about something. Still, gods, that's hard to believe. Then there is this prophecy. I always believed in free will. Now I'm being told that prophecy is real. What if I choose not to fulfill my duty? Not go along with some archaic notion of prophecy? Chris looked to Philip. What is this prophecy that I'm announcing? What's it about? Maybe I don't want it to happen. Again, what if I don't do it? What if I don't do what I'm supposed to do? What will happen? You say I don't have a choice, but do you really know? According to the fates, I shouldn't have been allowed to be a vampire. Maybe I could just not do what I'm told to do. Have you thought about that? Alright, so that's the end of what I have written. So let's see what I wrote for being in this scene. So it's from Philip's, Chris's, and Draven, Christopher's perspective. He's going to walk into the room. Philip will be sitting down. Did that, so I'll highlight it. So they'll have a conversation about what happened. Christopher will tell them from his perspective. He'll then be confused. That happened. Did that. Who are the fates? They maintain the cohesiveness of the weave. Talked about that one right there. There are gods, really? Did that. Philip will talk about the gods. No specific gods. They are real. God may exist. Don't really know. It's been a while since they walked the earth. Covered that. Presage will be mentioned and explained. It is a person that ignites prophecy. Certainly did that. Chris will mention a child in Freiburg. Haven't done that. Chris will know more about Freiburg as he talks about it. It will ignite the knowledge he didn't know. Freiburg is the biggest city near the Black Forest. He has a very strong urge to go there. He closes his eyes and gets a vision of a maternity ward. They leave. So I still got to do these things, but I need to get the conversation to that point. So my goal today is to try and finish this scene. There isn't much more to write in it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. It's been a long time since I've actually written in this story. And I'm kind of picking up mid-thought here. Alright. Philip shook his head. As I said, I don't think you can't do what has been predetermined. This will happen. The results of you finding the child of prophecy has already happened. Yeah, push the wrong buttons. Italicized, bam. Chris looked dubiously. Cannot spell. Oh, I spelled it right. Okay. Chris looked dubiously at Philip and thought to himself, what about this dark weave? If it's unseen, then no one would really know. I may yet be able to live. I may yet be able to avoid my death. Philip seems to be intent on the prophecy being fulfilled. Chris looked dubiously at Philip and thought to himself, what about the dark weave? If it is unseen, then no one would really know. I may yet be able to avoid my death. Philip seems to be intent on the prophecy being fulfilled. Philip seems to be intent on the prophecy being fulfilled. I feel more like a tool in there. Philip seemed to be intent on the prophecy being fulfilled. I feel more like a tool than a person in his eyes. I'm more of a tool than a person in his eyes. Oh, that could be part of the other paragraph. Alright, so Chris looked viciously at Philip and thought to himself, but what about this dark weave? If it is unseen... Oh, that should be a question mark. Capital I. Chris looked dubiously at Philip and thought to himself, but what about this dark weave? If it is unseen, then no one would really know. I may yet be able to avoid my death. Philip seems to be intent on the prophecy being fulfilled. I feel more like I'm more of a tool than a person in his eyes. Even at the realization that Philip's mind was made up about how things were going to unfold, that desire for finding the child was ever present. He knew it was something that he had to do. Let's see, I'm trying to connect what I need to have happen to what has already happened. So I'm going to have to go back and reread this in my head really quick. Alright. So he's already mentioned a child in Freiburg in some respect. Actually, did he mention Freiburg? I'll do a quick search here. Long scene. Okay, Control F. Freiburg. Pictured it in his own head. No, I haven't. Okay. Alright, so I gotta figure out how I want to introduce Freiburg here. Freiburg. Chris looked to Philip and Draven, who were both looking at him expectantly. Well, I guess there is nothing to do but find the child to fulfill my destiny. I know the child is someplace. I know the child is someplace called Freiburg, and it's somewhere out east. I don't know how I know this, but I can feel it is so. Alright. So I did do this. Bam. Philip nodded. I know where that is. It's near the Black Forest. That seems fitting. Chris looked at Philip questioningly. It does? How so? What's so important about the Black Forest? Philip explained there are places in this world where the magic of previous ages still finds a way. Places here where magic, while still limited, is stronger than other places. Wow, I really messed up this paragraph. Places of power. The Black Forest is one of those places. Now, you say you can feel that it's to the east. Describe that feeling. Chris thought a moment, trying to figure out how to explain it. It's something innate. It almost feels like something is in my head is that it almost feels like something is in my head. Something in my head. It almost feels like something in my head is pointing me there physically. If I move to face the direction, there is a release of pressure in my head. Let's say that. There is a release of pressure, letting me know I'm facing the right way. Philip looked at Chris thoughtfully. That sounds very much like how the calling feels. Why don't you close your eyes and focus on that thought? If it works how I suspect it works, you may be able to glean more information from that feeling. Chris sighed and closed his eyes. He focused on the feeling and where it was directing him. He cleared his mind, and suddenly images began speeding past him as if he was moving at supersonic speeds through the world. And eventually it stopped. He was looking at an image of a building as if he was standing right there. He looked around and saw a sign, Freiburg University Hospital. Then he opened his eyes, and he was back in the room with Draven and Philip. I just realized I didn't say where the Black Forest is. Which, I know where it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I shouldn't say specifically where that is. It's near the Black Forest. In Germany. There we go. Something happened as I focused. It seemed to speed across. Something happened as I focused. I seemed to speed across the world to Freiburg. I stood in front of some sort of hospital, the Freiburg Hospital. And I opened my eyes, and I was back here with the here. Period. Philip raised an eyebrow in surprise. I figured it would be like the culling, but nothing that specific ever happened. Seems you glean more information than I would have expected. I was wrong. It's not like the culling after all. I wonder what other powers a Presage has. Alright. So, did that... It's not exactly what had happened. I said I wanted to look at a maternity ward. That's pushing. Then the image blurred and he was standing in a maternity ward. Then he opened his eyes. I saw the then. Yeah, I'll fix that in post. Something happened as I focused. I seemed to speed across the world of Freiburg. I stood in front of some sort of hospital in Freiburg University Hospital. The image blurred and I was standing in the maternity ward of the hospital. It's a hospital a lot. Then I opened my eyes and I was back here with both of you. Philip raised an eyebrow in surprise. I figured it would be like the calling, but nothing. Alright, so I did this section. Now they have to leave, and I'll be done with this scene. Draven spoke. I guess we should head to the airport and make our way to Germany and see if we can find this child of prophecy. Boom. End of scene. So as normal, when I finish a scene, I delete the outline because I don't need it anymore. We'll move on to the 7th scene. I kind of want to write a little bit more in the scene first. That's a good way to end it. So the next scene is going to take place on April 23rd, 1996 in Germany at 11:47 a.m. In this scene, it'll be Chris's perspective. They'll be standing in front of the Freiburg University Hospital, just like in his vision. They will walk in, find the maternity ward. Chris will be drawn to the viewing room where the children are on display. He will want to go in and touch a specific child. He will try to do so, but he will be stopped by Draven. They will find out that the name of the child is Tobias Sturchenwald. The mother's name of the child is Sophia Sturchenwald. The father is unknown. Philip will find out who the mother is when she will be released. Philip will suggest they come back later that night. And that will be the end of the 7th scene. So probably won't be very long. Not like the last scene, which was many pages. Then we have the 8th scene, takes place later that night. We got 9, 10, 11, 12 more scenes. There might be a 13th scene, I haven't decided after, but we'll see. So I think this was a good first start, and I will have to do this again. Let's say next Tuesday. Let's see, what day is that? October 25th, 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, AM. And we'll get back to it, and I will get into writing and less editing. But this was a good start. I feel very confident and look forward to doing more. Thank you for everyone that came in. Icarus for chatting, and Violet for lurking, and Locke for lurking, and Grumpiest Gus for lurking. Appreciate all that. And I will see you all next week.